To Liam, the future of this estate. The words, spoken by my own father, echoed through the grand tasting room of Viridian Estate, sharp and glittering as shattered glass. They sliced through the celebratory murmur, severing the fragile thread of hope I'd allowed myself to weave over the past year. This wasn't a celebration of our vineyard's miraculous recovery. It was the public execution of my career. My breath caught in my throat, a knot of ice forming in my chest as I watched my father raise his glass, beaming at my younger brother, Liam, lounging against a century-old oak barrel with his signature effortless charm, gave a lazy, triumphant smile. He hadn't spent a single night agonizing over soil acidity reports or frost warnings. He hadn't negotiated with creditors until his voice was raw, nor had he personally pruned the vines in the biting pre-dawn chill. I had. At 52, I, Elara, had poured the last 2 decades of my life and every cent I owned into resurrecting this dying land. A year ago, this room had been silent, shrouded in the dust of failure. My father's tearful phone call had pulled me from my life in France, where I was a respected viticulturist for a premier Bordeaux chateau. Viridian was weeks from foreclosure. He'd whispered, a legacy built by my grandparents crumbling into dust. I didn't hesitate. I sold my small apartment in Saint-Emilion, liquidated my retirement fund, and came home. The place was a ghost of its former glory. The vines were neglected. The equipment was archaic. And the wine, once the pride of Sylvan Valley, was thin and unremarkable. The online reviews were brutal, a shadow of its former self. Tired wine from a tired estate. Overpriced vinegar. It was a betrayal of everything my grandparents had stood for. For 12 months, I worked with a singular, ferocious focus. I lived and breathed Viridian Estate. I implemented sustainable farming practices, replanted entire sections with hardier rootstock, and modernized the fermentation process with temperature-controlled tanks I paid for with my own money. I used my connections in Europe to bring in a consultant who helped refine our blending techniques. Nights were spent hunched over spreadsheets, my back aching, as I rebuilt our distribution network from scratch. I trained the small, demoralized staff, teaching them to speak about our wines with the passion and knowledge they deserved. And it worked. The transformation was staggering. Our new rosé sold out in 6 weeks. Our flagship Cabernet Sauvignon received a 93-point rating from a major critic. Bookings for tastings tripled. For the first time in a decade, Viridian Estate was not just solvent, it was profitable, vibrant, and respected. Tonight was supposed to be a dinner to thank our staff and loyal patrons. A night where I was scheduled to present the phenomenal quarterly results. Instead, I was invisible. As the applause for Liam died down, my mother glided over to me, her hand patting mine with that familiar, dismissive gentleness. Elara, darling, don't look so grim, she murmured, her voice a soft caress that felt like a slap. Your brother just has a natural gift for leadership, for the big picture. You're so wonderful with the details. The soil and things. She said it as if explaining a complex concept to a simple child, her smile never wavering. The details she so easily dismissed were the very foundation of our success. The soil was the soul of our wine. Liam strolled over, swirling a glass of the very Cabernet I had meticulously crafted. Hey, sis, he said, his voice laced with false sympathy. Don't take it personally. Someone has to keep the day-to-day operations running while I focus on expanding the brand. He spoke of the brand as if it were some abstract entity, not the living, breathing vineyard I had nursed back to health. He had dropped out of business school and drifted through a series of creative ventures, none lasting more than a few months. His only contribution to Viridian's revival had been a few vague suggestions about redesigning the labels. Yet, in our parents' eyes, his effortless charm was worth more than my lifetime of expertise and a year of back-breaking labor. I could feel the eyes of our staff on me. Marco, Our cellar master, who had worked here for 30 years, stared intently at the floor, his jaw tight with a loyalty he couldn't voice. Maria, our tasting room manager, whom I had personally mentored, looked at me with a pained, helpless expression. They knew. They had seen who was in the fields at dawn and who was in the lab late at night. They knew who had saved their jobs in this estate. And now, they were forced to watch this charade, to applaud the prince while the queen was quietly dethroned. I excused myself, my legs feeling unsteady. I walked out onto the veranda, the cool night air a shock to my heated skin. The familiar scent of damp earth and distant oak filled my lungs, a scent that had been my comfort since I was a child playing hide-and-seek among these very vines. While other girls had tea parties, I was learning to test sugar levels in grapes with my grandfather. While Liam was at summer camp, I was helping my father with the harvest. This place wasn't just a business, it was woven into the fabric of my being. Looking out over the moonlit rows of vines, a cold, hard clarity washed over me. It was never about my ability. My success was met with polite, lukewarm praise. That's nice. Dear, while Liam's slightest effort was hailed as genius. I had been a tool, a specialist brought in to fix a problem. And now that the hard work was done, I was being put back in my box, while the favored son was handed the crown I had forged. The humiliation was a physical ache, driving home on the winding country road. My vision blurred by tears, I refused to let fall. A faded sign caught in my headlights. For sale, Briarwood Vineyards. It was our old rival, a property with incredible potential better sun exposure, older vines that had fallen into disrepair after the owners passed away. I slammed on the brakes, my car skidding to a halt on the gravel shoulder. My heart hammered against my ribs. The property was a mess. But the land was magnificent. Something inside me, a thing that had been slowly cracking for years, finally snapped. Or perhaps, it finally healed into a new, unshakable shape. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I dialed the number of the top real estate agent in the valley. "Tell me about Briarwood," I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time all night. "I'm interested." The following morning, I sat in my car across from the entrance to Briarwood, the weathered sign creaking in the breeze. The raw humiliation of the previous night had cooled into a hard, dense stone in my gut. Was this really the answer? Buying a derelict vineyard to compete with my own family? A wave of doubt washed over me. Sans patent, it made me dizzy. It felt like a childish, 52-year-old tantrum written in acres and deeds. For a moment, I saw myself through my mother's eyes, the bitter, detail-oriented daughter, consumed by spite. The thought was so paralyzing that my hand reached for the ignition, ready to drive away and bury the insane idea. But I stopped. I thought of Liam's smug smile and my father's proud declaration. I thought of my mother's condescending pat on my hand. They hadn't just passed me over. They had erased me. They had used my knowledge and passion to save themselves, only to discard me once the danger had passed. This wasn't just spite. It was survival. Stepping out of the car, I pushed through a rusty iron gate, the screech of metal echoing in the quiet morning. The place was a beautiful ruin. The vines were a tangled mess, choked with weeds, but I could see they were old growth. Their gnarled trunks promising grapes of incredible complexity. If given a chance, the tasting room was dilapidated, its windows clouded with grime. But it was built from local stone and had a magnificent fireplace. The property had better bones than Viridian, a superior terroir. My mind, the technical, detail-oriented mind my mother belittled, began to race. I could already see it north-facing slopes, perfect for a crisp Chardonnay, a rocky patch ideal for a mineral-driven Syrah. I knelt down, crumbling the dry, loamy soil between my fingers. It was alive, full of potential. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about honoring the land, about creating something magnificent that was entirely my own. The next few months were a blur of calculated risks and relentless work. I met with the realtor, an old acquaintance who looked at me with a mixture of pity and admiration. The owners were desperate to sell, thanks to 2 decades of frugal living and smart investments. My savings were substantial. My credit was flawless. I presented my business plan to the bank, a thick binder filled with soil analyses, financial projections, and a market strategy so thorough it left the loan officer speechless. I secured the loan. The day I signed the final papers, the keys to Briarwood in my hand, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt a profound and terrifying sense of responsibility. I had bet everything on myself. I threw myself into the revival. I hired a small crew, including a few seasoned vineyard workers who had grown disillusioned with the new vision at Viridian. The first major hurdle came sooner than I expected. I called our family's longtime cooper, the craftsman who supplied Viridian with all its French oak barrels, to place a large order. His voice was strained. "Ilara. I can't," he stammered. "Your father called me. He reminded me that our families have worked together for 50 years. He made it clear. If I sell to you, my contract with Viridian is finished." The line went quiet. It was a direct, brutal blow. My family wasn't just ignoring me. They were actively trying to sabotage me. Panic, cold and sharp, pricked at the edges of my composure. Without quality barrels, my wine would be mediocre at best. For a full day, I felt the weight of their betrayal trying to crush me. But as I sat in the dusty, empty cellar of my new estate, a memory surfaced from my time in Bordeaux. I remembered a small, independent cooperage in Burgundy, a family-run operation named Tonnellerie Dubois. They were artisans, known for their meticulous wood selection and their unique, slow-toasting methods that imparted an unparalleled elegance to the wine. They were notoriously exclusive and far more expensive than any local supplier. Getting a contract with them would be a long shot and a financial strain. I spent 2 days crafting an email, not as a potential client, but as a fellow artisan. I wrote about the old vines of Briarwood, my vision for the wines I wanted to create, and my deep respect for their craft. I attached my soil reports and my plans for the winery. A week later, a reply came, not from a sales manager, but from Jean-Pierre Dubois himself. He was intrigued. He agreed to supply me with a limited number of his finest barrels for my first vintage. It was a crippling expense, but it turned my family's act of sabotage into my greatest asset. My wines would now be aged in barrels no one else in the valley could get. That evening, I stood on a hill overlooking the vineyard as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet. It was the summer solstice, the longest day of the year, a perfect balance of light and darkness, a turning point. And in that moment, the name came to me, clear and certain. This would be Solstice Vineyards. It was a testament to new beginnings, to finding light in the encroaching dark. It was the start of my own legacy. While I was breathing life into Solstice, a slow, creeping decay was taking hold at Viridian. The contrast became the talk of the valley. Word travels fast on the grapevine, both literal and metaphorical. My tasting room, which I had designed myself with clean lines, warm wood, and large windows overlooking the valley, was always full. I focused on an intimate, educational experience. Guests didn't just taste wine, they learned about the unique terroir of our land, the challenges of the vintage, the reasoning behind my blending decisions. My first releases were small, but they were exquisite. The critics who had once lamented Viridian's fall were now heralding the arrival of a bold new voice in the region. Solstice Vineyards is a masterclass in restoration. One influential blog wrote, "Ilara has taken a forgotten plot of land and made it sing." Meanwhile, the songs at Viridian were turning discordant. I heard the stories through shared harvest workers and sympathetic delivery drivers. Liam, in his quest to make a name for himself, had decided our family's signature Cabernet Sauvignon, A wine perfected over 50 years was stodgy. He wanted to modernize it. Against the strenuous objections of Marco, Pour Loyal Cellar Master, Liam insisted on a shorter fermentation and aging in cheaper American oak to create a bolder, more approachable profile. The result was a disaster. The wine lost its elegance, its structure, its very identity. Longtime patrons were confused and disappointed. A prominent wine journal that had given my grandfather's last vintage a 95-point score described Liam's new creation as a clumsy, oaked-up fruit bomb that disrespects its noble lineage. The fallout was swift and brutal. Viridian's wine club memberships began to drop. Restaurants that had carried our Cabernet for decades quietly removed it from their lists. To compensate, Liam slashed prices, cheapening the brand and confirming to the market that something was deeply wrong. But my family's response wasn't to correct their mistake. It was to double down on their offensive against me. The social pressure became a quiet, suffocating fog. At the local farmer's market, Carol, a woman who had cooed over me in my crib, gave me a tight, cold smile and turned away to admire a pile of heirloom tomatoes. My weekly coffee date with 2 old high school friends was abruptly canceled, then never rescheduled. I was being subtly, but systematically, erased from the community's social fabric. Then they escalated. A major distributor in the city, a man I had spent weeks building a relationship with, called me, his voice heavy with apology. "Elada, I'm so sorry," he said. "Your father and brother came to see me. They offered me an exclusive contract for the entire valley, a huge discount on the condition that I drop Solstice. It was a devastating blow, cutting me off from dozens of key restaurant and retail accounts. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, followed by a chilling sense of despair. They weren't just competing, they were trying to bleed me out, to ensure my failure. The inevitable confrontation happened on a crisp autumn afternoon. I was in the cellar, carefully checking the brix levels of my fermenting Syrah, when the doors flew open, letting in a blinding shaft of sunlight. Liam stood there, silhouetted against the bright rectangle of the doorway. He looked disheveled, his usually perfect hair out of place. He marched towards me, his face a mask of fury. "What do you think you're doing?" he spat, his voice echoing off the stone walls. I calmly set down my hydrometer and turned to face him. "I'm making wine." "Liam, it's what I do." "You're destroying us," he yelled, taking another step closer. "The distributors are dropping us. The critics are mocking us. And it's all because of you. You set up this spite winery right on our doorstep to make us look bad." I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't see the smug, favored son. I saw a scared, cornered man, thrashing about in a sea of his own incompetence. His anger was just a shield for his terror. There was a tremor in his hand, a flicker of panic in his eyes that he couldn't quite conceal. He was in over his head, and he knew it. "I didn't do this to you, Liam," I said, my voice quiet but unyielding. "You did this to yourselves. You took a legacy and treated it like a toy. You fired loyal staff. You ignored expert advice. And you changed the one thing that made Viridian special. Solstice isn't the reason you're failing. It's just the mirror that's showing you the truth." "You're trying to destroy everything," he repeated, the words sounding hollow now. A desperate plea rather than an accusation. "Grandfather's legacy, everything our family built." "No," I replied, a profound sense of clarity settling over me. "I'm the one who's actually trying to preserve it. Not the name on the sign, but the principle behind it, respect for the land, dedication to the craft. What you're trying to protect isn't a legacy, Liam. It's just your pride." He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing with no sound coming out. For a single, fleeting moment, I saw a crack in his armor, a glimmer of shame. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. replaced by the familiar, sullen resentment. He turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving me alone in the cool, quiet dark of the cellar, the sweet, promising scent of my wine filling the air. The Sylvan Valley Vintners Guild Awards was the most prestigious event of the year, a night of shimmering gowns and hushed anticipation held in a grand meader. Historic ballroom. I used to attend with my father, watching him accept accolades for Viridian with a swelling pride. Tonight, I sat at a table with my own team, my small, fiercely loyal crew from Solstice. I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach, a strange mix of hope and dread. Across the cavernous room, I saw them. My parents were seated at a small table near the back, looking lost and diminished amidst the celebratory buzz. They hadn't been nominated for anything, but they had come, likely out of habit or a morbid sense of obligation. Liam was nowhere to be seen. When the presenter reached the category for Best New Winery, my heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He listed the nominees, and when he said, "Solstice Vineyards," my team erupted in a cheer. Grabbing my hands and squeezing them, I managed a shaky smile, my eyes darting involuntarily to my parents. My mother was staring at her hands, folded tightly in her lap. My father just looked tired, his shoulders slumped in his tuxedo. And the winner is... The presenter tore open the envelope, a theatrical pause hanging in the air. Solstice Vineyards. For a moment, I couldn't move. The room dissolved into a roar of applause. My cellar master, a man I'd hired away from a larger corporate winery, was clapping me on the back. His face split in a wide grin. Maria, my tasting room manager, was in tears. They pushed me gently from my chair, and I walked toward the stage in a daze, the spotlight blinding me. As I accepted the heavy, ornate award, I looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of light and shadow, and then I found them again. My parents, two small figures in the distance. I stepped up to the microphone, my hands trembling slightly. "Wow," I began, my voice thick with emotion. A year ago, Solstice Vineyards was just a field of tangled weeds and a dream I was almost too afraid to have. This award belongs to my incredible team, who took a leap of faith with me and poured their hearts into this land. I thank them by name, my voice growing stronger with each word. I also have to thank my family at Viridian Estate. A tense silence fell over the room. It was there I learned my very first lessons about the art of winemaking. And some much harsher, more valuable lessons about the realities of business. This journey taught me that sometimes the most fertile ground for growth is the one you have to cultivate for yourself. The applause was thunderous, tinged with the uncomfortable thrill of an insider's understanding. As I returned to my table, people stopped me, congratulating me, their eyes alight with a new respect. The rest of the evening passed in a joyous blur, but I knew the night wasn't over. As the crowds began to thin, I saw my parents making their way toward me. A slow, deliberate procession through the emptying tables. My mother reached me first, her smile brittle. "Elara, what an evening. It's remarkable what you've done," my father added, his voice raspy. He couldn't quite meet my eyes. There was no real warmth in their words, only a strained acknowledgement of a fact they could no longer deny. Then, my mother's hand found my arm, her grip surprisingly tight. "Darling," she began, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We need to talk. Your brother? Liam is struggling. The bank is making threats. He's in over his head." "We're a family," my father interjected, finally looking at me, his eyes pleading. "A family's legacy is at stake. Your grandfather's legacy. We need you to come back. To help Liam. Guide him. You have the experience to fix this." I stared at them, the award in my hand suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. They stood before me, not as proud parents, but as supplicants, blind to the profound irony of their request. They saw my success, not as my own triumph, but as their potential salvation. They wanted me to abandon what I had built from nothing, to go back and repair what they had willingly broken. A strange calm washed over me, a peace born of a wound that has finally, fully healed. I gently removed my mother's hand from my arm. I offered my help a year ago, I said, my voice even and clear. Stripped of its former pain, I offered my experience, my savings, my entire life, to save Viridian. You chose, Liam. You didn't want my leadership then. You wanted my labor. But his name, now that your choice has led to this, you're asking me to step in and clean up the mess. I held their gaze, letting the truth of my words settle between us. I'm sorry, I said, and for the first time, it was a statement of fact, not an apology. But I can't do that. That is not my responsibility anymore. My mother opened her mouth to argue, the old patterns of guilt and obligation ready to spring forth. But I held up a hand. I will give you this, I said, reaching into my purse and pulling out a pen and a business card from my wallet. I wrote a name and number on the back. This is Catherine Vale. She's the best turnaround consultant in the wine industry. If anyone can save Viridian, it's her. But my work here, I said, gesturing around the grand room, at my team celebrating in the distance, is done. My father took the card, his hand trembling slightly. My mother simply stared at me, a look of utter incomprehension on her face. For them, family was a tangled web of duty and debt. For me, it had finally become a boundary. I turned and walked away, not looking back. The weight in my shoulders, a weight I had carried for so long I had forgotten it was there, was gone. I wasn't the bitter daughter or the spurned sister anymore. I was just Alara, vintner, founder, free. Walking into Solstice the next morning, the air crisp and smelling of rain, I was greeted by the warm aroma of brewing coffee and the sight of my team buzzing with energy. They had decorated the tasting room with balloons and a banner that read, "Congratulations," seeing their joyful faces. I realized this was my family now, the one I had chosen, and that had chosen me. My success wasn't about proving my parents wrong anymore. It was about proving to myself that I was right to believe in my own worth. And as I raised a glass of my award-winning wine with the people who had helped me create it, I knew I had finally found my peace, a vintage more precious than any I would ever bottle. If this story of finding strength in betrayal resonated with you, and you believe in the power of forging your own path, please show your support. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about resilience and triumph. Let us know in the comments about a time you had to build your own success from the ground up. Your story matters.